The air in the cabin was stale and cool, the kind of manufactured air that tastes of plastic and distance. I was folded into my seat in row 12, a scratchy airline blanket pulled up to my chin. Sleep wasn't a peaceful escape for me anymore. It was just a different room for my grief to live in. I had been dreaming of Ben. In the dream, we were on our little porch back home, watching the fireflies blink in the summer dusk. He was telling me a terrible joke, the kind he always loved, and his laugh was so real, so warm. I could almost feel the vibration of it in my own chest. The dream dissolved like sugar in water. When a gentle hand touched my shoulder, my eyes fluttered. Open, the cabin was still dark, a long metal tube hurtling through an endless night sky. A few pinpricks of reading lights dotted the darkness, and the low, constant hum of the engines was the only sound. A flight attendant was leaning over me. Her face was kind, etched with the faint lines of 1,000 forced smiles. But this one seemed genuine, ma'am, she whispered, her voice soft so as not to wake the sleeping man next to me. Mrs. Adams. I nodded, my mind still thick with sleep and the ghost of my husband's laughter. How did she know my name? I fumbled for my boarding pass on the empty seat beside me. The seat Ben should have been in. The captain would like to have a word with you, she said, her expression unreadable. My heart did a little nervous flip. The captain. My mind immediately raced to the worst possible scenarios. Was there something wrong with the plane? Did I do something wrong? Did I leave my bag somewhere? It was the kind of irrational panic that had become my constant companion since Ben was gone. Now, I whispered back, my voice raspy. If you don't mind, he's just outside the cockpit. I untangled myself from the blanket, my joints stiff and complaining. I slipped on my shoes, my hands trembling slightly as I tried to smooth my wrinkled clothes. The man in the aisle seat was a heavy sleeper, his mouth slightly open, so I had to perform a clumsy, apologetic ballet to get past him. Following the flight attendant up the narrow aisle felt surreal. The other passengers were anonymous shapes. In the dim light, lost in their own worlds of sleep or quiet contemplation, we passed the galley, where another attendant was pouring orange juice into tiny plastic cups. The scent sharp and sweet. And then I saw him. The captain was standing just as she'd said in the small space before the cockpit door. He was older than I expected, with silver hair at his temples and kind, crinkling eyes that looked like they'd seen their fair share of sunrises. His uniform was immaculate, the 4 gold stripes on his epaulets gleaming softly in the low light. He gave me a small, reassuring smile. Mrs. Adams, I'm Captain Evans. I'm sorry to wake you. It's okay, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Is everything all right? Everything is fine with the aircraft, I assure you, he said, his voice calm and deep. The kind of voice you want to hear when you're 7 miles above the earth. I had a question for you. A bit of an unusual one. He paused, and in that silence, I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. What could a pilot possibly want to ask me? He seemed to be choosing his words carefully. Understand. Your husband's name was Ben Adams. The sound of his name spoken by this stranger in this strange, suspended place between sky and earth hit me like a physical blow. All the air went out of my lungs. I must have swayed because he put a steadying hand on my arm. I'm sorry, he said quickly. I know this is sudden. I didn't mean to startle you. I just shook my head, unable to speak. My throat felt tight, and I could feel the hot sting of tears behind my eyes. I'd spent the last week in Paris, a trip we had planned for our 10th anniversary, walking the streets alone, seeing the sights for 2, and I had managed to keep the tears locked away. Now, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, a stranger had found the key. I knew Ben, Captain Evans said softly. We flew together a long time ago. In the Air Force, he was my wingman, the best I ever had. My mind struggled to catch up. Ben had rarely talked about his time in the service. It was a box he'd packed away, full of memories he didn't seem keen on unpacking. I knew he could fly, that he loved it, but he always said he preferred having his feet on the ground with me. He talked about you. I finally managed to ask. A warm, sad smile touched the captain's lips. He talked about you, mostly. Called you his true north. Said you were the one who kept him grounded. He looked down at his hands for a moment, then back at me, his eyes full of a deep, sincere empathy. Look, Ben and I kept in touch. Not as much as we should have, but we did. When he bought these tickets, he called me. He found out I was flying this route and pulled some strings to get on my flight. He was planning to surprise you, to introduce us mid-flight. A sob caught in my throat. Of course he was. It was such a Ben thing to do. A grand, secret, romantic gesture. He loved surprising me. He'd once filled our tiny apartment with hundreds of balloons just because it was a Tuesday. Now, the knowledge of this one last undelivered surprise was almost too much to bear. The seat beside me wasn't just empty, it was full of the ghost. Of his love, of his plans, of the future we'd lost. Captain Evans seemed to understand. He didn't rush me, he just stood there, a quiet pillar of strength in the dimly lit aisle. When I saw your name on the passenger manifest alone, he continued gently, I made a call. I'm so very sorry for your loss, Clara. Ben was one of the good ones. He used my first name. It felt familiar, as if Ben himself were speaking through him. He told me something. Clara, the captain said, his voice dropping even lower, becoming more serious. It was a running joke between us, but he was serious too, said Dave. If for any reason I'm not on that plane with her, she's flying home alone, you do something for me. He made me promise. I looked at him, my eyes wide with confusion and a dawning, fragile sense of wonder. Promise what? And that's when he asked me the question. The shocking, impossible, heart-stopping question. Ben asked me to invite you to see the sunrise. From the cockpit, he said he always wanted you to see the world from his favorite seat. So, Clara, would you like to come and watch the sun come up with us? For a moment, I couldn't process the words. They just hung there in the quiet air of the airplane, the cockpit, the sunrise, a promise from my husband delivered by his old friend. It was so unexpected, so profoundly, heartbreakingly beautiful that I couldn't speak. The tears I had been holding back for a week finally broke free. They weren't loud, gasping sobs, just silent, hot tears that streamed down my face. Captain Evans didn't seem fazed. He just handed me a crisp, clean handkerchief from his pocket. It's okay, he murmured. Take your time. I nodded, wiping my eyes. Part of me, the grieving, sensible part, wanted to say no, to go back to my seat, wrap myself in the blanket, and retreat back into the numb darkness. It felt like a betrayal to experience something so beautiful without him. But another part of me, a part I thought had died with Ben, felt a flicker of something else. This wasn't just a sunrise, it was a gift from him, it was his last surprise. And I knew with a certainty that cut through the fog of my grief, that I couldn't refuse it. Yes, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. I'd like that very much. Smile returned, warmer this time. Good. Follow me. He opened the cockpit door, and a soft glow of 100 tiny lights spilled out. I stepped inside, and the world changed. The narrow, claustrophobic tube of the passenger cabin was gone. In its place was a panoramic bubble of glass, a window onto infinity. Below us was a thick, plush carpet of white clouds, glowing faintly. In the pre-dawn light, above the sky was a deep velvet indigo, littered with more stars than I had ever seen in my life. It was like we were floating in the space between two separate heavens. The co-pilot, a younger man named Mark, turned and gave me a friendly nod. The cockpit was surprisingly quiet, just a low electronic hum and the soft crackling voices from the radio. Captain Evans gestured to a small jump seat behind his own. Have a seat, Kay said. I sat down feeling like an intruder in a sacred space. I couldn't take my eyes off the view. It was overwhelming. Ben used to call this his office, Captain Evans said, settling into his chair. He said it had the best view in the world. He started talking then, not about Ben's death, but about his life. He told me stories from their Air Force days, stories Ben had never told me. He told me about a time their plane's engine failed over a desert and how Ben's calm voice on the radio had guided them both through it. He told me about how Ben had once traded a week's worth of rations for a worn-out paperback of my favorite book to give to him. Because he'd heard him say he missed reading. He was always thinking of other people, the captain said. His eyes on the horizon, especially you. He'd send me these emails sometimes. Just a picture of you two in the garden, or a silly video of you trying to bake bread. He'd just write, "See? Told you I was the luckiest man alive." I listened, and I cried, and I smiled. Hearing these stories from this man who knew a different side of my husband felt like finding a hidden box of his old photographs. It didn't make the pain go away, but it made Ben feel present, alive, right here with us, in this glass bubble floating through the stars. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the horizon began to change. A thin, electric blue line appeared, separating the dark earth from the dark sky. "Here it comes, the co-pilot," Mark said softly. We all fell silent. Watching the miracle unfold, the blue line bled upwards, turning to a soft, pale violet. Then a fiery orange. The stars began to fade, as if drawing back a curtain. The colors intensified, painting the edges of the clouds below in shades of pink and gold and brilliant crimson. It was the most beautiful, most powerful thing I had ever witnessed. It wasn't just a sunrise. It was the birth of a day happening, right in front of me as the first sliver of the sun. A blinding, brilliant white diamond crested the curve of the earth. It flooded the cockpit with golden light. It washed over everything, making the dust motes dance in its rays, warming my face, my hands. And in that moment, I felt Ben's presence so strongly it was as if he were sitting right beside me, his hand in mine. This was his gift. This was his way of saying goodbye. This was his way of telling me that even after the darkest night, the sun will always, always rise again. The tears flowed freely now. But they were different. They weren't just tears of loss. They were tears of love, of gratitude, of a beauty so profound it hurt. I was crying for the man I had lost, but I was also crying for the love we had shared. A love so big it could reach across death and send me a sunrise. Captain Evans reached back and gently squeezed my shoulder. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He understood. I stayed there for a long time. Long after the sun was fully above the horizon, watching the world below wake up. The blanket of clouds broke apart, revealing the deep, endless blue of the ocean. Captain Evans and Mark went about their duties, their voices a low, professional murmur. But they gave me the space to just be, to breathe, to feel. When it was time for me to go back to my seat, the captain walked with me to the door. "Thank you," I said, and the words felt so small, so inadequate for the gift he had given me. "Thank you for keeping your promise." "Was my honor, Clara," he said, his kind eyes meeting mine. "Ben was my friend. He'd have done the same for me." He paused. "Grief is a heavy cargo to carry. But you're not carrying it alone. Remember that." I walked back down the aisle to row 12. The cabin was brighter now, the window shades being lifted one by one. People were stirring, stretching, ordering coffee. The world was moving on. The man next to me was awake, reading a newspaper. He glanced at me, then went back to his reading. Unaware of the miracle I had just witnessed, I sat down, not in my own seat, but in Ben's by the window. I looked out at the vast blue sky, at the sun shining on the brilliant white wing of the plane. The grief was still there, a dull, heavy ache in the center of my chest. I knew it would be there for a long time. It was the price of a great love, and I would pay it willingly. But something had shifted. The crushing weight of it felt a little lighter. The darkness felt a little less absolute. The sunrise hadn't fixed me, but it had given me something I hadn't realized. I lost a glimmer of hope. It was a promise, painted across the sky, that there would be another day. And another after that, and that I had the strength to face them. Ben was gone. But his love wasn't. It was in the stories his friend told. It was in the warmth of the sun on my face. It was right here, in my heart. A true north to keep me grounded, and a wingman to help me fly. And as our plane began its slow descent toward home, for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was flying, not falling.